Hello everyone, I'm your host, Dirty McDirtface, bringing you Death and Destruction, and you're listening to the Dirt On Podcast. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the classic 1933 monster movie King Kong, directed and produced by Merian C. and Ernest B. Schoedsack, and starring Fay Wray, Robert Armstrong, and Bruce Cabot. Now, if you're like the majority of people in the world, you've probably heard of King Kong. And that's for very good reason, because this film is considered by just about everyone to be one of the classics of American cinema. It not only has a sequel, but it also has 3 remakes. And not only does it have 3 remakes, but those remakes each have their own sequel. So this film has 3 sequels, 2 remakes. I actually do not know of any other films that have remakes that have their own sequels. I'm sure they exist, but I can't personally name any. It is ranked by Rotten Tomatoes, which is not a good source for cinematic criticism, but we'll cite it anyway, as being the greatest horror film ever made and the 56th greatest film ever made. And purportedly, it was also a personal favorite of noted film critic Adolf Hitler, best known for other work. So, what is all the fuss about? What makes this black and white movie about a big monkey made out of clay such a big freaking deal? Well, let's find out. And what better way to find out than by me delivering an extended rant in which I spoil every single event that happens in this movie. After all, that is sort of what this podcast is about. So, before the film begins, we're treated to a proverb, which reads, "And the prophet said, and lo, the beast looked upon the face of beauty, and it stayed its hand from killing, and from that day it was as one dead." Now, the film says that this proverb comes from Arabia, that this is an Arabian proverb, but it's not. It doesn't actually, this proverb doesn't actually exist. There's no record of it anywhere before this film, so I'm gonna guess Merian C. Cooper just made it up, which is fine, because it does set the stage, it does set the stage, and it gives you an idea sort of what this film is going to be about. So after that proverb, we are treated to some dialogue between 2 characters, a theatrical agent by the name of Charles Weston, played by Sam Hardy, and another guy who doesn't show up again. Now, this dialogue is, how do I put this? Bad. This dialogue, it's not good. It's not very good. Even though this is a good movie, it's pretty, it starts off kind of slow. So we have, at the opening, we have this dialogue between these 2 guys, and Charles Weston wants to board this ship, the Venture, which is being manned, or led, sort of, by Carl Denham, who is described as being a fearless film producer who will do just about anything in order to get a motion picture. He goes to, he films nature documentaries, basically. He films nature documentaries, which were very profitable in the 1930s, which is why he's considered to be a famous film producer. And so he goes on this ship. He goes on the ship. Charles Weston does, and we are then introduced to our 2 main characters, or our 2 main male characters. Anyway, these are Carl Denham, played by Robert Armstrong, who we already mentioned, and Jack Driscoll, who is played by Bruce Cabot, and who is sort of the real protagonist of this movie. Now, Denham goes on this rant, basically, about how he wants to get an actress for this film, this nature documentary. I'm not sure what the actual role she would play in this film is. It's not really stated, but she is supposed to be in it. Driscoll doesn't particularly want that. We'll see later that he just absolutely despises women, so that's not surprising. But Carl wants to get a woman in this picture because he's come to the conclusion after being told this by various critics, that if he puts a woman in his films, he'll get twice the money. Twice the money. So, obviously, being a film producer, he wants to do what will make him the most money, and so he wants to go and get himself an actress to play to star in this film. And this is where the overarching theme of this film is sort of established, because we see right out of the gate that Carl Denham is a guy who really, really loves money. This guy, he really wants to get as much money as he can get, and he will do anything. He will stop at nothing to get money. And of course, this results in disaster later on. You'll see how. So this sort of establishes basically the overarching theme of this film, which is sort of a message pertaining to greed and the destructive consequences thereof. So, in order to find an actress, Denham decides that the best place to go is the Woman's Home Mission, and he's just going to pick an actress off the street, basically. So he goes to this fruit shop where he happens to see a woman, played by Fay Wray, trying to steal some fruit, because this was during the Great Depression, so fruit stealing was a thing that happened. Of course, she doesn't succeed in stealing the fruit. The guy manning the fruit stand calls her out for it with the astounding line, "Ha-ha, I catch you, you stealer," which I guess is a thing people said in the 1930s. I don't know. That's kind of an unusual thing to say, though I think I will definitely say it if ever someone tries to steal something from me and I catch them in the act. So Denham actually bribes the guy running the fruit stand to leave her alone, basically, and then Denham and the woman go to this coffee shop where she reveals that her name is Ann Darrow, and she happens to be a down on her luck actress, which is quite convenient for Carl. So he offers to get her into a motion picture, this motion picture that he's creating, and he delivers this spiel about how there's going to be adventure and romance and all the stuff people want when they go to act in a motion picture. And so, of course, she agrees to appear in the motion picture, and they board the ship. And it's at this point that Jack Driscoll and Ann Darrow meet each other, and Driscoll decides to woman bash a bit. So he basically they have a conversation wherein Jack describes how he is not at all happy with the fact that that Denham has decided to bring a woman on board the ship, because he basically believes that they're a big distraction, and they're just going to be a problem. So she decides that she's going to go play with the ship's monkey, Iggy. The ship has a monkey on it, which is another interesting thing. I don't know if ships frequently have monkeys on them, but this one does. So she goes and plays with this little monkey, and Carl Denham comes by and he makes a joke about Beauty and the Beast, which is also foreshadowing, of course, because this is another theme that crops up throughout this film. Not just her interacting with monkeys, but also the whole Beauty and the Beast thing. So Denham shares his speculation after Anne leaves on that Jack happens to be carrying a torch for Anne, which turns out to be true later on. Not that much later on, but later on. And he delivers a lecture on the power of beauty, which, again, is this film basically taking its major themes and spelling them out for you, which is pretty nice of them. We then cut to Denham talking with the ship's actual captain, Captain Englehorn, who's played by Frank Riker, telling him about the destination, which is an uncharted island, which has become called Skull Island in the later films in the King Kong franchise. It's called Skull Island. It's not actually called that in this film. It doesn't actually have a name, but it does have Skull Mountain on it. It is said to have Skull Mountain, but all we know about it is that it's an uncharted island and it has Skull Mountain on it. So it sort of just got retroactively renamed Skull Island, but that's what I'm going to call it from now on, because that's what everyone else calls it. Denham also mentions that the natives on this island believe in or worship an entity known as Kong, which is said to be trapped behind this big giant wall that the natives have constructed. And we'll see later that what exactly the natives do as part of their worship of Kong. I'll tell you right now, it's certainly something. And then following this, we have a cut to Carl Denham doing some filming, specifically of Anne. He has her act out a scene in which she sees and reacts to something horrible, which is implied to be gigantic by the fact that she has to look way up at it to actually see it, which again is more foreshadowing. This film does do a lot of foreshadowing early on. It has a lot of scenes that are emblematic, basically, or not, I don't know if emblematic is the right word, but sort of are sort of symbolic of events that happen later in the movie, because we have the fact that Anne mentions that the monkey on board the ship likes her, and later on we'll see that the big monkey on the island also likes her in a different way, and we have Carl's speech about beauty, and now we have this scene of Anne seeing something horrible and gigantic. So following this, the crew actually arrive at Skull Island, and Denham and Englehorn hear a drum beat in the distance. And Denham, ever the optimist, assumes that it must be the friendly natives signaling to the crew to greet them as they arrive on their island, which is not the case at all, but he's going to assume that anyway, probably because it'll be most financially beneficial to him if that's true, because then the natives will just accept his film crew onto their island. But no, that's not true. So they disembark, or they get on the island, and we then see the wall, and we hear ominous chanting. We hear the natives chanting Kong over and over. So Denham looks through some leaves, and he sees the natives performing some kind of ritual in which they've got some guys in ape costumes walking in a circle around a native woman who has been put on an altar. And of course, naturally, they don't exactly they don't exactly get away with spying on the natives. The chief sees the crew, and he puts an end to the ritual, saying that the ritual has been spoiled because the crew has seen it. Now, fortunately, Englehorn is able to speak the language of the native islanders. He's a pretty knowledgeable guy. So knowledgeable, in fact, that he speaks this language that was actually made up. This film, it's not actually it's not actually real. It's not a real language that they're speaking in this film. It's stuff that it's just stuff that the writers made up. So the chief tells Captain Englehorn and the rest of the crew that they need to leave immediately. But Denham is having absolutely none of that. Denham does not want to leave. Of course, he doesn't want to sacrifice all the all the hard work and time that went into this, into arriving on board this on this island, which is another instance sort of Carl Denham's greed getting the better of him, because it's pretty clear that these natives are not going to be friendly with the with the crew, so it would make a lot more sense at this point for the crew to just turn back and head home. But of course, Denham isn't going to do that. The sunk cost fallacy will not allow him to go back home after having come all this way to the to Skull Island. But of course, the chief is more than willing to provide us with some helpful details about the nature of the ceremony that they're conducting. It turns out that the woman is actually the bride of Kong, which is odd considering he's a giant ape and she's a regular-sized human woman. So I'm not sure what purpose she serves him, but movie. But the chief isn't really interested in giving up this woman anymore. He's decided that, because you see, Andero is blonde, you see, which is a huge freaking deal in the Melanesian Islands, because blondes aren't exactly a commonality around those parts. So, of course, she's seen as being more valuable because she's a lot rarer in those parts of the world. So he decides that she needs to be the bride of Kong on the basis that she is blonde, and offers to buy her. Actually, he offers to trade the crew 6 of his own tribeswomen for her. But Engelhorn declines the offer, being sort of a quality over quantity kind of guy. And then the crew leaves for a moment. They go back to their ship. And then we're treated to some more dialogue between Jack Driscoll and Andero, in which Driscoll basically sums up Carl Denham's character in one sentence, which is, that Denham's such a fool for risks, there's no telling what he might ask you to do for this picture. And that later proves to be incredibly accurate, because we see later on that Denham is more than willing to risk the destruction of a city in the name of money. While he doesn't expect the city to get destroyed, he believes the city can't possibly be destroyed, but he's willing to take outrageous risks because he hopes it'll get him some of that sweet moolah, And then following this, Jack decides that he's going to confess his love to her, and he does that in a very stuttery way. He didn't prepare for this, evidently, considering he's not very eloquent in his with his confession, but of course it works, and they kiss, and romance happens. But unfortunately, after Jack leaves, the moment is thoroughly killed when a group of the natives hop on board a raft, and they sneak up on Anne and they kidnap her. They just kidnap her. They just kidnap her and they carry her onto their own raft and they just take her back to their island. They're pretty serious about having her be the bride of Kong. So, Denham and the rest of the crew end up hearing a drum beat in the distance, and Driscoll goes and or Jack goes and looks for Anne. And then the Chinese cook, Charlie, sees just happens to see a native bracelet lying around. And he's a little disturbed by this, so naturally he sounds the alarm, and everybody comes out to see what's going on. And he shows them the bracelet and utters the immortal line, "Crazy black man been here," because the 1930s were a magical time. So Jack calls for a search throughout the whole ship, and of course they don't find her because, duh, she's been kidnapped and taken back to the island. So they do the sensible thing, and they grab up all the guns and bombs that they brought with them to go and fight the natives to save her, basically, from their from their sinister schemes. So we then cut to the ceremony itself, which of course is home to torch waving and dancing because, well, naturally, it's a big event. The sacrifice of this blonde woman to Kong. It is something you'd want to be enthusiastic about, naturally. So, the big gate that they have there in the wall, that gets opened up, and Anne is hauled by the natives onto a stone altar and tied up there. And then the tribesmen, they bang this gong, and we hear heavy footsteps and ferocious growls coming toward us. And then we see the big man himself, the big K, if you will. We see none other than Kong, the giant monkey who we all who we all came into this movie to see. Now, this film is known for its usage of stop motion effects, which was a pretty big deal in the 1930s. Now, during the first scene where King Kong actually appears, the stop motion effects are pretty jerky. They're pretty they look a little odd, I will admit. Even as a defender of this film, they look a little. The special effects look kind of strange. I mean, Kong's movements are very, they're pretty erratic, and they don't really make a whole lot of sense. But you have to understand that this was revolutionary for the time, because before this film came out, no one had really done special effects in a movie. It wasn't really a thing people did. They had like makeup and costumes. They had that had been in style for quite some time by the time this film came out. But this was the closest thing they had to what we now think of as being CGI. Of course, CGI is awful, and I don't support CGI at all in films. I think it's infinitely inferior to practical effects, which is what this film uses, obviously. But even though the effects, the effects in this film are not particularly advanced by our standards, and they look a bit odd, they are still extremely for the time. They are extremely good because, as I said, no one had done this, and so the alternative would have been like a guy on stilts in a monkey costume. And do we really want that? No, I don't think we do. I don't think we want a guy on stilts LARPing as a gigantic woman kidnapping ape. That's just we're just not down with that. I don't think so. They used special effects, or they stop motion effects rather. They used stop motion for this, and now I watched this film. Let me give you a bit of a personal anecdote. I watched this film last year with my dad. I had suggested it, and he had a bit of trepidation about it initially, because he was expecting the stop motion effects to be awful, and he figured the film would basically just be completely laughable because of it being so out of date by 21st century standards. And the first scene in which King Kong makes his appearance did not disabuse him of that notion. In fact, he told me that he was pretty unsettled when King Kong showed up. And not because King Kong was particularly terrifying, but because the effects were all jerky, and he was basically expecting it to be that way for the whole movie. And I myself was pretty alarmed as well, because I was worried that I had just suggested a film that wasn't going to end up being good. And I am honor-bound to only suggest films that end up being good, which is why I never suggest that we watch films. Which is why I never suggest that we watch films, because they always end up being good, but I'm always afraid that they'll end up being bad. So, but he also said that either he got used to the wonky stop motion effects, or they actually improved throughout the movie. Now, I'm not entirely sure which one it is. I think he just got used to them, because I rewatched this film last night, as of the time that I'm, well, not technically last night, but last night from my perspective, as of the time that I'm recording this, and I didn't. They were pretty. They were kind of jerky throughout, but I think you do sort of. It is a little jarring to see at first in a when you're watching this film in the 21st century, as opposed to any other time you may be watching this film. If you're a time traveler, maybe you're watching this film at a different time, but when you're watching this film as a 21st century viewer, it is a little jarring to see King Kong, to see the big clay monkey making all his jerky movements, but you do basically get acclimated to King Kong's funny looking movements after some time. So anyway, King Kong is very happy with the woman that he's just been presented, and so he unties her and he carries her off into the woods, which raises the interesting question of what he was doing with all the other women that he had been offered. Like, did he just eat them? Did he just leave them there to die? What did he do? This is never stated, but it is an interesting question of what he did with all the previous brides he was offered, but didn't like. Maybe he sent her back into sent them back into the village, but I don't think you can really get. I don't think you can really get much respect once your god has rejected you as a sacrifice. That's a sentence I didn't expect to say today, but I have just said that. And so, just as... Hold on, I'm going to turn that on. So, naturally, following this event, the crew arrive with their guns and their bombs just in the nick of time. And by just in the nick of time, I mean just in the nick of time for there to be nothing at all to be done. Because she's gone already. The monkey has just taken her off. They're literally a few seconds late. But that makes all the difference. But of course they're not going to let a little thing like that stop them. Because these are some real men we're talking about. So they all get together and they open up the they open up the gate. They pull back the bar that's holding the gate shut, and Jack Driscoll decides basically he's gonna appoint himself to be the leader of the armed expedition. So he commands roughly half the crew to stay behind and guard the gate, and he takes the other half into the jungle with him. And so the crew begin to march through the jungle, and they follow Kong's tracks, which are said to indicate that he is as big as a house, his size kind of fluctuates throughout this movie. I believe he's bigger at the very end than he is when he first shows up. I may have that backward. I'm not actually sure, but his size does change a few times throughout throughout this film. And so they start following King Kong's tracks, and then a Stegosaurus attacks them, and they fight the Stegosaurus. They knock it out with one of their bombs, and then they actually kill it by shooting it through the eye. Now, there are a fair few dinosaurs in this film. There's well, not necessarily dinosaurs, but prehistoric animals. There are a few of these, and you could say this is done to just pad the runtime or to show off their special effects if you want to be uncharitable. I don't want to be uncharitable. I never want to be uncharitable on this show. So I think it is an adventure film. So it is basically it's meant to give you an adventure, it's meant to give you thrilling fight scenes. And so they can't have all the thrilling fight scenes be the one with Kong. So they put in these dino attacks in order to in order to thrill the audience, basically. So the crew arrive at a river, so they have to leave their guns and their bombs behind for a moment. And what better time could there possibly be than when they have just disarmed themselves for another dinosaur attack? This time it's a this time it's a plesiosaur attack. Now, a plesiosaur comes out of the river and attacks them. Now, these dinosaur attacks, they may sound like they're repetitive, like they're just repeating the same thing over and over, which is what repetitive means. Wow, that was brilliant right there. Repeating the word repetitive. So you may think that these they may sound like they would be repetitive, but they're really actually pretty engaging. These dinosaur attacks. So I can't really fault the filmmakers for that, because they are actually legitimately enjoyable to watch, in my opinion. These dinosaur fights. Another interesting thing here is that we see people actually die on screen, and not just die, but be killed on screen in a black and white movie from the 1930s, which was pretty which is kind of strange for the time, but I have more to say on that later. So they escape from the plesiosaur, and then they have an Apatosaurus chase after them. And another notable thing happens here, another death, when the Apatosaurus snatches a man out of a tree with its mouth and bites down and kills him. Why on earth this guy decided he would climb a tree, to the result of that being him being separated from the rest of the crew and being high up while being attacked by a dinosaur with a very long neck. Why he did that, I'm not sure, considering that that's a very, very, very clearly bad decision, but he did it anyway, and he got eaten by an Apatosaurus. So tough luck. And following the Apatosaurus chase, following the escape from the Apatosaurus, we once again see King Kong. Now, King Kong, he pursues the men, and he shakes some of them off of a log into a ravine, and we see them falling in and screaming as they hit the ground. But fortunately, our boy Jack, he's fine. He escapes. He escapes into a cave, and he using a rope, he climbs down a rope and slides into a cave, and he actually manages to cut Kong's hand with his knife when Kong reaches down to get him. Which, good work, Jack. That's nice. Then we see a big lizard climbing up the rope that Jack used to escape. So you sort of expect there to be a fight scene, but no. Jack just cuts the rope and we're good. The lizard's dead now. So that's nice. And then following this, a Tyrannosaurus Rex attempts to eat Anne. This is a recurring event in this movie. Monsters trying to get Anne during this part of the movie with the with the jungle adventure. I'm not entirely sure why she's so special to these animals. Maybe blondes just taste better. Like, I don't know what is so special about her, but a T-Rex comes over and tries to eat Anne, but Kong, of course, is having none of that, and so they have a fight, which I think this film is sort of the birthplace of the big monsters fighting genre of film, because now we have movies like Godzilla versus King Kong and Godzilla versus every other giant monster that has ever been made. There were rumors there was going to be a film called Godzilla versus the Devil, which I would have loved to see, but which sadly was actually a myth. So there's a few. There are three specifically. I believe three. There are three instances of King Kong having to fight off another giant monster, and this has sort of become a pretty common thing in Hollywood. You'll see movies about this one giant monster fighting this other giant monster. They take they just pick some giant movie monster, and they pick another one and they go, oh, who's gonna win? Well, who could win this fight? Usually it's the one who's more human, which is why in Godzilla versus King Kong is presented as being sort of the good guy, because Godzilla's a lizard and King Kong is a primate. So we human viewers are able to better identify with the ape than we are with the lizard. So, so this film was sort of the birthplace of that, and of the giant monster genre in general. Now, the way King Kong kills the dinosaur, or kills this T-Rex, is interesting, because he actually snaps its jaw open with blood. We see a fair amount of blood gushing out of this T-Rex's jaw, which brings to mind an interesting fact about this film, which is that it's really violent by the standards of the 1930s. Now, I mean, in movies nowadays, this would be nothing special. Nowadays, you have films like Saw, where you have plenty of violence, but in the 1930s, this was a huge deal. You couldn't really, you wouldn't really see something like, for instance, The Thing, which is another one of my favorite movies. You wouldn't see something like that in the 1930s. But this film is quite. It features a fair amount of gruesomeness, and the reason for that is that it came out before the Hays Code was introduced. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Hays Code, which is probably most of you actually, considering y'all are normal people, and normal people don't obsessively research Hollywood lore like I do. And now the Hays Code was introduced in the late 1930s. Or not the late 1930s. It was, I don't remember the exact date that the Hays Code was introduced, but it was conceived by Hollywood in order to basically self-regulate the film industry, because there were some fears that the government was going to step in and start regulating movies, because there had been quite a bit of public outcry over the moral degeneracy contained in a lot of the nation's films at the time, mostly to do with crime films and movies involving sex, which were viewed to be corrupting the population. Crime films in particular were held to be corrupting young men into immorality, whereas sex films were said to be corrupting young women into into immoral behavior. Now, the Hays Code was introduced by by Hollywood. It was created by a bunch of Catholics in order to ensure that American cinema is in line with Catholic doctrine, despite America not being majority Catholic, and despite the filmmakers overwhelmingly not being Catholics. So there's a joke that goes that the Hays Code amounted to Catholics censoring films made by Jews for Protestant audiences, and that's basically what the situation was like. Now, the Hays Code didn't actually mention violence. It did. Filmmakers were advised to handle violence cautiously, but the Hays Code didn't have any prohibitions of violence specifically. It prohibited significant amounts of sexual content. It prohibited swearing. It prohibited blasphemy. It prohibited drug use. It banned disrespecting the flag. That's a good one. But it didn't really ban violence. And so, you could still get away with some violence under the Hays Code, but not as much as you could get away with before it. There was... So this film was able to get away with a fair bit of violence, though it did undergo censorship after the fact. After the Hays Code was introduced, new censorship was introduced. It was another interesting fact. It was banned in Germany when it first came out in 1933 because it was viewed to be offensive to the ideals of certain political movements that were in power in Germany at the time. But it was later the ban was later dropped, possibly on the grounds that a certain influential German statesman of the day happened to be a big fan of the film. And as a result of that, it was released in Germany under the title of King Kong and the White Woman. So that's an interesting fact. So anyway, Jack climbs what remains of the rope that he has just cut, and so he is able to meet up with Carl Denham, who it turns out is the only other survivor of the jungle expedition. So he sends Carl back to go get some bombs while he continues chasing down Kong. And Denham goes back to the ship, and he talks to Captain Englehorn, who says that they fought off they got into a fight with the natives and won. Obviously, because the natives are armed with, like, spears and bows and arrows, while these guys have guns and bombs. Not really a particularly fair fight. Now, this is another interesting theme in this film that crops up, is the theme of civilization versus savagery. Now, this was discussed in the previous episode of this show about the Call of Cthulhu, because H.P. Lovecraft liked to talk about this theme a lot. And it also comes up in this movie, the theme of the struggle between civilization and savagery, but in a much different way. Now, Merian C. Cooper, who was one of the directors and producers of this film, was deeply fascinated by both the past and the future. He was very intrigued by primitive cultures and by modern technological advancements. He, at the age of 6, decided he was going to become an explorer and go and visit tribespeople in the savage parts of the world. And later in life, he decided he said he wished he would live long enough to see space travel invented. and he wished he could go to space. Now, obviously, that didn't happen, but it shows that this guy Merian Cooper, was very intrigued by both the things of the past and the things of the future. Which, honestly, me too. In fact, I think a lot of people are, a lot of cool people are anyway. And now, Merian Cooper was sort of the opposite of H.P. Lovecraft in this regard. We mentioned on the last episode that H.P. Lovecraft was very concerned with the idea of savagery overtaking civilization. He liked modern civilization, but was concerned that what he saw as being the savages would overtake it. Merian Cooper had the opposite deal. He sympathized with the he sort of sympathized with the primitive, but he acknowledged that the technology of the modern world would invariably conquer the primitive cultures of the past. So this is another interesting theme in this film: the struggle between the traditional world order and the modern world order with its new technologies. So meanwhile, Jack continues pursuing Kong, and Kong takes Anne to a cave for what I assume is meant to be a romantic date. Can't personally think of anything more romantic than that. Being carried off by a giant monkey into a cave. I'm sure that's every woman's dream. And then an Elasmosaurus shows up, and an Elasmosaurus is... It's sort of like a snake-looking thing. It's well, it's a type of dinosaur, but it's... Anyway, so that shows up, and it tries to eat Anne, because, of course, it does. But Kong fights the Elasmosaurus off, and he kills it by bashing its head against a rock, while Jack Driscoll watches this, probably thinking that this is the coolest thing he's ever seen in his life. And to be honest, it kind of is. And following this, we have we have one of the most interesting scenes in the film. Now, what happens in this scene is Kong picks Anne up, and he takes her up to the top of a cliff, and he, how do I put this exactly? He strips pieces of her clothing off, and smells his fingers. So, yeah, this is probably the only place in all of cinema where you can watch a woman get molested by a giant monkey. Yeah, now, the reason for all this sexual content in this movie, which is pretty odd for the 1930s, is once again because of the lack of the Hays Code. These scenes had to be dropped from the film once the Hays Code was introduced, because they ran afoul of the policies against any kind of sexual content in cinema. And so then a pterodactyl comes by. Kong puts Anne down for a moment, and then a pterodactyl comes by and picks her up, but Kong kills it and starts playing with the pterodactyl's corpse, apparently never having heard from his mother that you're not supposed to play with your food. But fortunately, the fact that he's playing with the corpse gives Jack an opportunity to help Anne escape from the cliff by rope. But of course Kong sees this and he just pulls them right back up, and then they fall into water. And now listen I understand that films do not have to respect the way that real life works. I understand the concept of artistic license. I am fully aware that writers have every right to set aside the real laws of the universe in the name of getting a better story. But here's the thing. Jack and Anne fall into water. And they're fine. They are completely fine after falling from a cliff into water, because it was water they landed into and not ground. Despite the fact that, as I'm sure you're aware, this is not actually how falling works. If you fall from a great height, it doesn't matter what you land on, you're gonna die. Like, you're gonna make contact with something, and it's the sudden shift in velocity that kills you. It's not contact with the ground. That would be stupid. So that's really the only part of this movie that actually annoys me. Really, the other issues in it I can just be freely ignored. But that's like, I can't get behind that personally, even though I do enjoy the rest of the movie. So anyway, after that thing that just happened, Anne and Jack escape from the jungle, and they go back to shore. And we see Carl Denham, who has a brilliant idea, a truly brilliant idea. He proposes that the crew should, get this, use Anne as bait so that they can capture Kong alive and get him on film. So, you might have noticed I mentioned earlier that this guy is kind of on the greedy side. Well, yeah, he is, clearly. Because he thinks that it's a good idea to use a woman who was just kidnapped by a giant monkey and present her with the possibility of once again being kidnapped by said giant monkey in order to make money. And later on in the film, he does, once again, present her with the possibility of being kidnapped by the same giant monkey in the name of making money. But of course that won't be necessary because King Kong just comes back of his own accord. So, some guy, he bangs the gong and the natives come out to stop Kong from breaking through the gate. They all hold up the gate, basically. They all like come together and they block the gate off with their hands. Unfortunately, though, it turns out a bunch of tribes people are not really able to match the strength of a giant ape, because he's able to break the he pushes hard enough to actually snap the wooden bar holding the gate shut in half, and he breaks through anyway. And what follows is actually, I think, probably the best shot in the whole movie. It's not the most famous shot, but it is, I think, my personal favorite shot anyway. It's a shot of Kong seen through the gate while all the tribe people run off toward the camera. I don't know exactly what about that shot is so compelling. Maybe it's the fact that King Kong is like right in the center and you have everyone running away from him. Maybe that's what it is. But there's something about that shot that is just incredibly cool to me. I don't know what it is. I think it might be that, but it's quite emblematic of just this of what this film is. So, Kong attacks the village and destroys a bunch of buildings. He gets spears thrown at him by tribesmen, which he just plucks right out of his body, because he's King Kong. He doesn't care. He eats people alive. He steps on people. He steps on people, which they're just dead after that. They don't actually seem to incur any physical damage. They're just we sort of just assume they had their bones broken, even though we don't hear any of that, and we don't really see them being smushed either, which does make sense considering this was the 1930s and there wasn't. First of all, you couldn't make a particularly gory film, considering the effects were not particularly advanced back then, but also it would get you in a lot of trouble with society, in particular state censorship boards. Before the Hays Code, they had, and I think during the Hays Code as well, I'm not sure about that though, individual states had their own film censorship boards that could demand cuts be made to certain films in order to have them play in their state, which meant that you could go to a theater in New York and see a movie, and then see the same movie in a theater in Massachusetts and see and have a scene that is in the New York movie that is not in the Massachusetts movie, which was very confusing, and I'm very glad that they made it a national system instead of just dividing it into different states. But anyway, so at the beach, Kong gets bombed. He gets bombs thrown at him and he gets knocked out, and the crew captures him alive, which means Denham's plan paid off. They managed to capture him, and Denham says, "Why, the whole world will pay to see this," which does show his mentality of money first, which has already been pretty well established by this point. But it's just another it's just another instance of his money grabbing antics. So they load King Kong onto something. It's not really made clear. But anyway, following this, we have a cut to just throngs of people in New York who are coming to see Kong, and we then cut to backstage, where the press shows up to harangue Anne, Jack, and Carl to just bother them basically about Kong, and we actually hear Kong growling off screen, which means that they are literally interviewing these three people while the giant monkey is right next to them. Yeah, so Denham suggests that the journalists run with a Beauty and the Beast theme to describe the story of what happened on Skull Island, and there's that theme again, of the Beauty and the Beast thing. And so then we cut to the actual theater where we have a deeply upsetting scene where a woman is under the impression that what she's about to see is a motion picture, and then when she's told it's not, gets all flustered and leaves, despite the fact that what she's about to see is a lot cooler than a motion picture, which means she missed out on one of the coolest things she could ever have seen, though that's probably for the best. But then our boy Carl, he comes out and he delivers a speech about what happened on Skull Island, and then we see the man. We see King Kong. He's been chained up. He's got handcuffs on, giant titanium handcuffs. He's chained to the ceiling, and And then we see Anne and Jack come out, and Jack is told by Carl to put his arm around Anne, and this really makes Kong mad. Kong starts roaring like a maniac, and Carl mentions that this is probably not a good thing, to which some guy from the press goes, let him roar, it's a swell picture, which... yeah, that is a pretty accurate depiction of journalists, if you ask me. They would do that, wouldn't they? Just be perfectly willing to accept the possibility of a giant monkey going on a rampage if they think it'll get them a good story. So, of course, King Kong breaks his titanium chains, which Carl had earlier assured everyone were unbreakable. He goes ahead and he breaks them, because Carl was wrong. And, as always, Carl was wrong. And so, upon him breaking out of his chains, King Kong goes on a rampage throughout New York. And he starts destroying things. He eats people, steps on people. There's a scene where Kong reaches into an apartment and pulls a woman out of it. And then, upon realizing that she isn't Anne, he just throws her to the ground. Which she was sleeping when he when he grabbed her, which must have been quite the way to start the day. I reckon she was probably thinking, well, guess it's going to be one of those days, as that giant monkey hand grabbed her. So then Kong actually does find Anne in one of these apartment buildings, or in one of these apartments. It's the same building. And he kidnaps her again, and he climbs to the top of the apartment building, and then he crashes the train, which, is basically just how a typical day goes when it comes to public transportation. Just the trains get crashed by gigantic apes that then reach into the windows and kill people. That's how it goes when I board a train, usually. A giant ape or other giant monster shows up and crashes it. So then we cut to the crew hanging around a radio, and the guy on the radio announcer, says that Kong is climbing the Empire State Building, and this gives Jack an idea. He suggests that they should send out airplanes to shoot Kong. His idea is that if Kong puts Anne down for a moment, the airplanes can shoot him, and kill him that way without hurting Anne. And then, following this, we cut to the really famous scene, probably the most famous scene in the movie, of Kong climbing the Empire State Building. Now, of course, this is a legendary scene, even though I already mentioned that my favorite shot is the one of Kong through the gate. I can't deny the incredible power that shot of Kong climbing the Empire State Building has. It is a very it's strong, I'll say that. It's very strong. So Kong climbs the Empire State Building, and he puts her down, and he stands at the top of the building. He beats his chest, and the airplanes come by. The pilots are actually played by the directors, I believe, which is interesting. And they start shooting at him. Now, these airplanes have a strangely difficult time hitting this giant monkey, which feels like it would be pretty easy. I mean, he's large. He's very large, so it seems like he should be able to be shot quite easily, but no, it's very hard for them to do that. So Kong downs a plane with his hand, and then he gets shot in the chest, and we see blood come out of him. And then he, following this, he picks up Anne one last time, and then he gets shot in the neck, and then he puts her down before being shot in the neck, and then he gets shot in the shoulder, and he plummets to the ground, and he lands and dies, and that is the end of him. So then we cut to the final shot of the film, where we see we see Kong's corpse with a crowd of people surrounding it. And Carl Denham talks to a police officer, and what we hear then is the iconic ending dialogue of King Kong. So the officer says, "Well, Denham, the airplanes got him." To which Denham says, No, it wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast." The idea here being that it wasn't the airplanes that killed King Kong. It was Anne's rejection of him. Which is, a few things that could be said about that. I won't say anything here, but, draw your own conclusions from that. So, that is the end of King Kong. So, what was all of that about, exactly? What is King Kong about? Well, obviously, it's about a giant monkey kidnapping a woman and rampaging throughout New York. But more than that, it is a story about the consequences of greed. Because it was Carl Denham's greed, really, that set the whole disastrous chain of events in motion in the first place. Without him wanting money, he wouldn't have gotten the idea to visit the island. Without him wanting more money, he wouldn't have brought Anne along. Without him wanting lots and lots of money, he wouldn't have tried to capture Kong and bring him to New York. And so, the message there, basically, is that the endless pursuit of profit at all costs is destructive, because we see that if Carl had just not wanted all the money that there is to be made in the world, all this death, all this destruction would have been prevented. So that's pretty heavy. It's also about the triumph of modernity over primitivity, which is a word that I've never used in my life, but I'm using it now. So, King Kong represents the primitive world, basically. He's very strong, but he's a savage, basically. He doesn't really understand what's going on. I mean, he is just an animal, after all. He's a very big animal, but he is just an animal. And he comes from a place where there's not really any, where there's no real technology the way we would think of it. They live in huts, and they have spears as weapons. While the Americans come by with guns and bombs. So the Kong was worshipped as a god by the people on his island, but then he comes to America and he gets killed, which is emblematic of the triumph of modern technological advancement over the primitive ways of the past. So this is pretty deep for a movie about a giant monkey kidnapping a woman and destroying a city. You wouldn't really expect that from a giant monster rampaging through a city movie. But, yeah, which, I mean, modern monster movies, I notice, do not really have the same depth that old school monster movies do. Because I believe they're making a new Godzilla vs. King Kong. I'm not sure about that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they're making a new one, or have already made a new one. And see, the thing about the thing about the modern monster movie is that it doesn't really have any real depth to it. It's sort of just like, it's big monsters for the sake of big monsters, and that's fine. There's nothing really wrong with that. I understand that the film industry is a commercial business, and filmmakers want to make money, and if they want to do that by making movies about giant monsters, There is a market for that. I don't think it's really. I don't really see how it's like it would be like socially harmful to have that sort of thing. So I'm not like condemning the modern monster movie or people who enjoy them, but I do think that classic monster movies and classic monster stories in general had a lot more depth and nuance to them than the newer ones do. Because King Kong, we've talked about for a whole hour, is about the consequences of greed. Godzilla, which I'll probably cover on another episode later, is about nuclear war and, well, nuclear testing, really. And even stuff that isn't about giant monsters still has themes to it. I'm not able to comment on the movies, really, but because I haven't seen those, but I have read the books. These are based on, I have read the one, and I'm in the process of reading the other. Dracula is about sexual predation and deviancy, and Frankenstein is about the consequences of playing God. So it used to be basically that monsters were used to explore deeper themes in storytelling. Mr. Hyde was an embodiment of the innate evil that lurks within us all. So I think it used to be basically that monsters were used in fiction as embodiments of concepts or to convey certain themes, while also providing the audience with a with a good scare. But now it's sort of that's sort of fallen by the wayside, I think, and you don't really have the deep philosophical monster movie that used to be a thing. I mean, I can't really imagine 21st century Hollywood coming out with a deep philosophical monster movie. I don't think that would happen. So, after a whole hour of ranting, it's time for me to come to the question that I posed at the beginning of this podcast, before spending an hour wasting your time, which is why King Kong is important. Well, for one, we talked about this earlier, but the stop-motion effects that were used in King Kong really did revolutionize cinema, because before this, people didn't use special effects. You had costumes, you had masks, and you had makeup, and that was it. You didn't have anything else. You had that. You could maybe do tricks with lights if you really want to push it, but there was never anything on the level of King Kong. There was never anything this epic in scale, and so the special effects provided by Willis O'Brien are extremely historically important, because, as I said, nothing like this had ever been done before, and it showed filmmakers. It showed a whole generation of filmmakers, basically, the way that things could be done, that things could be done in a much more. You could go much bigger. You could do things on a much larger scale than the way they used to be done. And so that is one reason why King Kong is so important. It also was responsible for popularizing the monster movie genre of film. Now, I'm not sure if this would actually count as a specific genre so much as it would fall under the horror genre, but it was basically responsible for basically normalizing the concept of the monster movie. That hadn't really been done before this came out, and it served as a tremendous inspiration for all the monster movies that have come out since, or the kaiju genre, if you want to talk Japanese. So this film was really the first, I think, to feature a scene of a giant monster destroying a city. And now there are tons of movies about giant monsters destroying cities. The most famous of these is Godzilla. And Tomoyuki Tanaka, who is widely credited with creating Godzilla himself, said, "I felt like doing something big. That was my motivation. I thought of different ideas. I like monster movies, and I was influenced by King Kong." So, yeah, without King Kong, you would not have Godzilla. And did I say Dracula earlier? I might be losing my mind. I don't know. I'm recording this at 1 a.m. So, I'm not in the best of shapes at the moment. But yeah, so the creator of Godzilla said that King Kong was an enormous influence to him. So, King Kong, in summary, is a good film. I enjoy it greatly. It has its flaws. It has some iffy dialogue and some iffy acting, but the plot is memorable and engaging, and it has earned its place in the annals of American cinema with its enormous influence on the on the industry. And that, my friends, is the dirt on King Kong. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you all again in the next episode. This has been Dirty McDirtface, and you've been listening to the Dirt On Podcast. Goodbye.